When I was in college, I was pretty involved in student cooperatives, where at Oberlin, where I was a student, there was about a fifth of the campus that was fed in these small student-run dining cooperatives. And the Oberlin Student Cooperative Association ran these 60 to 100 person dining halls, all on co-op student labor, because the college didn't actually have the capacity to feed everybody else in the centralized facilities at that point. But they were losing money running these small facilities in the basement of these old buildings. And so the students had kind of, starting in the 60s, taken over some of these buildings. And you could have much better food for much less money because the students were doing the work, and we also did all of the other stuff. So I got interested in not only the cooking and things, but the actual food buying and procurement. And it was happening at the same time in the later 80s that the whole concept of food miles and the distance that food had to travel, the average food molecule had to go 1,300 miles or whatever it was from the production site to your plate. That was like a brand new concept at that point. And so there were some people in school who were trying to get that going. And I was in the co-ops and involved in the food buying thing. And we started to realize, okay, because it's us, because it's students making the decisions, we can actually make this happen. And so there was there were a lot of people working together to try to move that forward and set up relationships with local producers. And so I got interested in agriculture kind of from the local economic development angle of it, because it was the late 80s on the heels of the farm crisis, where these communities all over the Midwest, and this was in Ohio, had just had their hearts and centers torn out of them as all these farms had crashed and burned, and the SML bankruptcies and all these different kinds of things had happened. And so having these local relationships where it had very tangible economic benefits to the local community, very tangible social benefits in building these relationships between these college students and these local farmers, and also environmental benefits in reducing the amount of transportation and hopefully finding sustainably sourced and grown food. All of those things were kind of coming together. So when I moved to Burlington, part of what attracted me is there were interesting things going on in cooperatives here. And so I knew a couple of people that had been there that had gone on and started work in housing co-ops in Burlington. I also knew that there was a lot going on in agriculture in Vermont, but I didn't have any background in it. I grew up as a city kid, came here and sort of gradually found my way into agriculture over the next couple of years, and like Hillary, enjoyed the work. And started working at Intervale Community Farm, which was a community-initiated CSA. And it wasn't a co-op at that point, but a lot of the functionality, when I came in it, I was seeing everything through a co-op lens. So I would look at this, and I looked at this organization, and I said, oh, it's all these people, these 120 shareholders, and they're coming, and they care about the farm, and it's not owned by, the farmer. It looked an awful lot like a consumer co-op. And so my approach to it as I gradually became involved and then central to the business was really to see the thing and behave as though it was a cooperative. So those kind of two interests of mine really dovetailed at that point.
And so with that, what was that process of, it started off as a community project that sounds like it was functionally a co-op, but not, legally one. Kind of
Right.
how did that sort of ownership structure formalize?
Well, it took a long time, I would say. We didn't go directly to co-op at all, and it was only after almost 20 years, actually, that we reorganized formally as a co-op in 2009. But there were various stages along the road. We had been part of a nonprofit, the Intervale Center, which is kind of the umbrella group in the Intervale. Maybe I should stop and say briefly, just the Intervale as a whole is overseen and stewarded by the Intervale Center, which is a 501c3 nonprofit, kind of agricultural development and preservation group. And so They've done a lot of things to help farms start up in the Intervale and elsewhere, and they have various different other projects. They had started the composting facility that was there for many years that's moved on to be a part of the solid waste district. They have a aggregated CSA where they deliver things. They have a conservation nursery that grows conservation nursery stock. But the big thing they do is they own a lot of farmland in the Intervale, and then they sublease it out to various different farms. So Intervale Community Farm is one of about a dozen independently owned and operated farms in the Intervale, which is all this floodplain of the Lower Winooski Valley in Burlington. Diggers Mirth, where Hillary is one of the other farms, and then there's about 10 others. So within that overall context, Intervale Community Farm, we started off as a little branch of the Intervale Center back in 1990, and then split off from there. And gradually, I could see, okay, we need more member involvement. We're a CSA. Clearly, we want to be growing things that people want, but we also, because we're not owned by me, the farmer, who's now the farm manager, we need those members to be involved in the governance and the overall stewardship of the organization as well. So we started a board, and started to have elections then a few years down the road. So gradually it developed. And what ultimately kind of pushed us in the direction was, A, having resources and expertise with a couple of people in the local community who had some suggestions about things to look at and how to organize. And B, realizing that we were in this sort of loosey-goosey middle ground where we couldn't easily leverage investment. We weren't a for-profit company, so we couldn't take investors that way, and we didn't want to be. That wasn't really what we were about. We were really about being responsive to our members, serving their needs. But we were a nonprofit that wasn't charitable, and so because we weren't charitable, we weren't a 501c3. Because we weren't really doing things that were fundamentally charitable. We were serving the needs of our members. And so because of those two things, we couldn't get grants. Since we weren't a nonprofit, we couldn't get investors because we were not a for-profit. So the co-op model was going to allow us to access some additional working capital through member equity and potentially co-op member loans. That before, we were dependent completely on reinvested earnings and debt to make that happen. So we made that transition in 2009 and have been kind of building up our co-op membership since then. So now we're at about 60% or so of our CSA members are now also co-op members. They pay a $200 fee to be a member of the co-op for life. They can pay that over time if they want, $25 a year to keep their equity current. And that is aggregating working capital that we can work from. And then this last year, we actually ran a co-op member loan campaign that was really exciting that we can talk about later or something like that.